Good morning, YouTube. Gonna do a quick run around the load boards. Had someone request New York. I thought I had recently done New York, but maybe that was one of the ones that got caught up in the glitches, and I might have deleted it before I uploaded it. But I could have sworn I recently did one. Anyways, so let's take a look around New York. We'll start with the box trucks, since it seems like a lot of people have an interest in those. I gotta tell you guys, I would have a really big concern doing box truck for a couple reasons. And maybe New York will be a little different because of the maneuverability advantage that they have. But in most markets, I just don't see a lot of work for them. And the markets that do have work seem to only have loads going one way. By that I mean, if you leave New York and go drop somewhere, it seems like there's no return loads. And so even if you get $2 a mile heading out, you're going to come back empty, which means you're going to make $1 a mile. And looking in other load boards, it's difficult to find. Most load boards don't even have a category for 26-foot box truck. And so it kind of seems to me like at that point, you need to go search and market yourself and seek out some direct clients that might give you like regularly scheduled work. Anyway, so in the New York market, there's 12 loads for a box truck. And so here's a 189 mile load, pays $1.97, but like I just got finished saying, how are you going to get back from there? What's your pay going to be to return? So there's 208 miles going to the Jersey Shore. It's multiple stops at 176. There's 174 miles, paying $2.10 a mile. 137 miles, paying $2.43. 59 miles, paying $4.50. 113 miles, paid at just under $3 a mile. That's kind of more worth it in my opinion, because once you drop, if you come back empty, you divide that 3 in half. Now at least your average is $1.50. So there's 127 miles at $2.71 a mile. There's 109 miles at $2.88. There's 77 miles at $3.39. 68 miles at $3.93. That's a pretty good rate per mile. Then there's 69 miles at $3.68. There's 57 miles for $4.33. We'll switch this over now to trailer provided. So this is what you would refer to as power only. So there's a team load at $2 a mile for just under 1,000 miles. There's 488 miles at $269. 116 miles at $426 a mile. 200 miles at $423 a mile. There's 416 at a little over $2 a mile. 707 miles for $220. That's a team's load. Someone asked the other day, how can you tell a team load versus a single load? You see how there's two little individuals there next to the money symbol? And then if you look here, there's a single. That indicates it's a team or a solo driver. And so there's 811 miles at $1.86. There's 366 miles at $3.72. 184 miles for over $4 a mile. That's not too shabby. There's 624 miles for $2.20 a mile. There's 580 miles at $2.48. There's 202 miles for for $5.21 per mile. 975 for $2.01 a mile. 975 for $2.01. And there's another one, so obviously they got a few that need to go, and they're paying the same rate. 799 miles for $1.90 a mile. There's 310 miles for $2.68. There's 196 for $2.16 a mile. 695 miles for $2.07. 437 miles for $2.68 per mile. You got 269 miles at $2.35. That's actually a pretty good rate for as long as that haul is, especially heading west. It's hard to get high-paying loads going west. You have 856 miles for $2.24 per mile. You have 1,063 for $2.09 a mile heading to Florida. There's a little short hop, 8.1 miles for $31 a mile. You have 196 miles at $3.04 a mile. Another 196 for $3.04. There's another one, so they got like a little batch of them to do. There's 73 miles for $3.35 a mile. 195 miles for $4.36. 786 miles for $2.74. That's a pretty decent rate. You have 315 miles for $2.57. There's 224 miles for $3.60. I'm not really sure why they're requesting teams on that. I think sometimes when people at Amazon enter these particular load requests, I think sometimes they do make mistakes. 304 miles for $2.80 a mile. You got 184 miles for $3.06 a mile. There's another one duplicating that, and yet another one. There's 224 miles for $3.60 per mile. 237 for $3.23 a mile. 592 miles for $2.36. I kind of said it before, their team rates are better, and I imagine it's because they need the freight to kind of catch up due to the bad weather. So here's 585 miles for $2.32. Here's a big week-long loop, 6,000 miles, so they're going to run you hard at $1.41. Some people jump on these and they think they're money makers because, you know, they're going to make $8,000 in 6 days, and they think it's a great money maker. But the part they're forgetting is, you know, they're going to spend a ton of money on fuel. If you say, let's just say you get 6 miles to the gallon, you're going to do 6,000 miles, so you're going to buy 1,000 gallons. Let's just say you're averaging $3, so that's $3,000 just towards fuel. Now you pay your drivers, let's just say you pay them 30% of that. There's another $3,000 that just went to paying the drivers. So you're at 6. That means that leaves you $2,600 for the truck, and you still got to take a percentage of that out for truck maintenance. I don't think those are money makers. I mean, it's a quick way to generate higher revenue, but you're not generating higher profit. Anyway, 587 miles for $246 per mile. There's another poorly paid team load. 300 miles for $196. There's another poorly paid team load, another one, and yet another one. 304 miles for $248. And let's take a look at let's look at when you bring your own trailer. There's only 25 loads there. So there's 336 miles for $376 per mile. There's 74 miles at $880 per mile. Another one that duplicates the first one, 190 miles at $441. 87 miles for $811 per mile. 388 miles at $379. 168 miles at $587. You know, that's kind of a good deal right there. There's 46 miles at $1166 per mile. There's 101 miles for $613 per mile. There's 285 miles for $375. There's 925 miles at $280. Remember, if you go to Jacksonville, Florida, you're going to struggle to get out of that area. And so there's 540 miles at $239. There's 460 miles at $289. 750 miles at $226. 233 miles for $416 per mile. 91 miles at $386 per mile. 144 miles at $366 per mile. 176 miles at $260 per mile. 204 miles for $252 per mile. 786 at $168 per mile. And this is out into Friday, so these loads are going to be cheaper just because they're not in a rush to get them out yet. But so someone asked that I compare the market. the market for New York. And so let's see if they have wrong place. Let's see if they have any power only. Yeah, I don't think Uber's set up for power only yet. I haven't seen a whole lot of it there. And so the first one right off the bat is it's 195 deadhead mile. And so let's see if I can change that a little bit. Just to make it comparable to what we saw on the Amazon filter was set to 100 miles. And so this way we're looking at the apples and apples. So I'm trying to remember how these are laid out. So there's 308 miles at $4.69 per mile. There's 699 miles at $2.61 per mile. There's 472 at $2.54 per mile. There's 185 miles at $4.83 per mile. There's 169 miles at $5.47 per mile. There's 80 miles at $9.43 per mile. Hard to argue with that. That's a quick, easy little load. There's 41 miles at $10.62 per mile. There's 596 miles at $2.35 per mile. There's 41 miles at $11.25 per mile. 26 miles at $23.60 per mile. There's 782 miles at $2.21 per mile. There's 216 miles at $5.11 per mile. That ain't bad, $1,000. You pick up at 2 in the afternoon, deliver at 8 the next morning. I guess it's a wash. So there's 253 at $5.15 per mile. That's a little better, right? I mean, you pick up at 1 in the afternoon, deliver 8 the next morning for $1,300. There's 29 miles for $600. Same thing. You pick up at 2 in the afternoon, and you deliver at 7 in the morning. The rate per mile is good, but the time kind of kills you. So there's 219 per mile. 219 miles at $5.48. $173 miles at $6.06. Here you got 197 miles at $5.38 per mile. There's 374 at $3.83 per mile. There's 105 miles at $8 a mile. That's a good deal right there. That's a load worth having. You make $800 from 8 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, and you're only going to go, 105 miles. I'm not familiar with the area. I don't know if that's a bad spot to go to or what, but that to me is a moneymaker. So there's 208 miles at $4.92 per mile, 108 miles at $5.97 per mile. Now, some of these loads aren't bad. There's 835 miles at $2.66 per mile. There's 175 miles at $6.06 per mile. So a lot of these loads give you the opportunity to do that thing that I say where you still make like $1,000 a day. So there's 630 miles at $2.48 for $1,500. There's 765 miles for $2.50 a mile. There's 700 miles for $2.49 a mile. Anyways, that kind of shows you what's comparable for the New York area. I think someone asked me for Atlanta. And this is power only. So there's a 95-mile move at $3 a mile. There's 390 miles at $2.57. But of course, remember, you go to Jacksonville, you're gonna probably leave empty and come back up to Atlanta somewhere. In other words, you're probably gonna make that loop, and that's gonna be all inclusive. You're gonna have to round trip that for that money. There's 121 miles for $3.19. This is one of those round trip tours at $173. There's 338 miles at $166 per mile. There's another one of those round trip tours, 2,200 miles, just under $2 a mile. That's a little better by their standards. There's another long tour for $128 a mile. I don't know how people do these. There's another tour, 1,700 miles at $1.72. There's 4,400 miles at $1.48. There's another one at $1.85 a mile. There's 202 miles at $2.04 per mile. There's another long tour at $1.28 per mile. These are getting into Tuesday, so, you know, I would hope these go up between here and then. And so the load board's a little bit dry for that area. I'll check box trucks because, again, I know some of you guys are interested in those. And this doesn't show anything. I think that's because I have this set to provided. Nope, still nothing. I know there is an active Atlanta market for box trucks, so it could be they've just taken them all. Had someone request Indianapolis. So since it's already on there, we'll start with box trucks, see what's there. There's 94s, so their market's pretty active. There's 221 miles at $2.14 per mile. There's 124 miles for $2.54 per mile. There's 100 miles at $3.88 per mile. There's 100 miles at $3.87 per mile. 195 miles at $2.26 per mile. 151 miles at $2.26 per mile. 112 miles for $3.50. There's 131 miles for $2.48. There's 133 miles for $2.54. 127 miles for $2.66. 89 miles for 377. There's 132 miles for 244. 93 miles for 280. 122 miles for 176. 165 miles for 180. 195 miles for 185. 184 miles for 171. And these are into Tuesday already, so that was kind of what was left over for Mondays. There's 150 miles for 182. 195 miles for 185. 165 miles for 184. 184 miles for 167. 128 miles for 207. 151 miles for 185. Me personally, guys, I think these are too cheap because you still have to find your way back home. And I know you guys have this big interest in the box trucks because they're kind of cheap to get into. But it doesn't mean that your fuel cost isn't going to kill you. These box trucks don't get great mileage. They have smaller motors, yes, but for them to have enough power, they give them very low gear ratios. So the engine's spinning really fast, and let's face it, it's a big old block you're pushing through the wind. So it's not like you're getting 12 or 15 miles to the gallon. You know, you're probably getting 9, 8, which is equivalent to what rigs get, especially modern day rigs. They're in the high 8s now. Anyway, I'm just trying to warn you guys, you might be thinking these are great money, and in some markets they may be. I've just not been able to figure out which ones. So I don't pursue these at all. There's 195 miles for 163, 189 miles for 157, 184 miles for 158. There's 122 miles for 202. There's 150 miles for 169. And let's switch over to some power only. There's 20 loads available right now. There's 198 at 326 per mile. There's another one, 198 for 326. There's 290 miles for 346 per mile. There's 935 miles for 248 per mile. There's 598 miles for 326 per mile. There's 598 miles for 326. Looks like that's a duplicate. And there's another one. There's 608 miles for 297 per mile. There's 5 miles at 45. There's 1192 miles for 238. There's 860 miles for 268. There's 188 miles for 206. There's 26 miles for $8.67. There's 464 miles for 170 per mile. There's 476 miles for 170 per mile. There's 263 for 163 per mile. There's 1,042 miles at 227 per mile. There's 622 miles for $263 per mile. There's 693 miles for $260 per mile. And then the bottom's a duplicate of that. So that's the Indianapolis market. I think I just did Detroit the other day. I did do Detroit just the other day. So I'm going to wrap this up so the video doesn't get too long. Most people don't make it to the end of the video. Anyways, as always, thanks for watching.